I used to think "it's fine" was just something people said to keep things moving. I didn't attach much meaning to it. It was just a sound that came out of my mouth when I didn't want to slow anyone down. Late evening, nothing special. Standing at a counter, receipt printer buzzing like it always does. Something wasn't quite right with the total. Not wrong enough to argue about. Just off enough to notice. The cashier apologized, half looking at the screen, half looking past me, already tired. And before I even checked the number again, I said it. "It's fine." It came out smooth, automatic, almost reassuring. And as I stepped aside, waiting for my card to clear, it hit me that I never actually asked myself if it was fine. I just said it because that's what I do. That moment stuck with me longer than it should have. Not because of the money, because of how little thinking it required. Somewhere along the way, being easy became something people complimented me on. Easygoing, chill, low maintenance. I liked hearing that. It sounded like I had my life together, like I wasn't one of those people always making things complicated, and I never connected that version of myself to money. I thought of it as a personality thing, not a financial one. But when I started paying attention, I noticed how often money was doing the work of keeping that image intact. Money was what prevented awkward pauses. Money was what avoided follow-up questions. Money smoothed over moments where I didn't want to explain, negotiate, or push back. It wasn't dramatic spending. It was quiet, invisible. And that's what made it slippery. I wasn't choosing to spend more. I was choosing not to interrupt the flow. And over time, that choice started showing up everywhere, just not all at once and never loudly enough to demand my attention. I started noticing it most clearly when checks were involved. Restaurants, bars, birthdays, any situation where the bill lands in the middle of the table, and suddenly everyone's posture changes just a little. There's always that quiet math happening behind people's eyes. I hated that part. The pause, the subtle tension. So I'd move fast. I'd round up, cover the tax, add a little extra to the tip. $5 here, 10 there. It felt harmless, polite, like I was helping the night keep its rhythm. I told myself it would all even out eventually, and maybe it did, but mostly it just disappeared. When I finally thought about it, really thought about it, I realized how brief the discomfort would have been if I hadn't done that. 10 seconds of awkwardness, maybe a raised eyebrow. Instead, I chose the version that cost money and left no trace emotionally, except it did leave a trace. Just not one I felt right away. Once I put numbers to it, that's when it got uncomfortable. Say it's $8 or $10 extra each time, maybe twice a month. That's close to $200 a year, just to make sure no one had to linger over a calculator or say anything out loud. $200 doesn't ruin your life, but it's heavy in a quiet way. It's groceries. It's a bill you didn't stress about because it never arrived all at once. And what bothered me wasn't the generosity. It was realizing I wasn't choosing to be generous. I was choosing speed, silence, relief. I wasn't paying for food. I was paying for the moment to be over. Subscriptions crept in the same way. Ones I barely used. Ones I meant to cancel. A gym I stopped going to when my schedule changed. A streaming service I kept because someone else used my login sometimes. $10. $15. Nothing that demanded urgency. Canceling felt oddly final, like admitting something was over, or worse, like creating a small inconvenience for someone else. So I let them sit. Months turned into years without me really noticing. When I finally added them up, it wasn't shocking. It was dull. Hundreds of dollars gone to nothing dramatic. Just money spent to avoid a mildly uncomfortable action. I wasn't paying for access anymore. I was paying to not feel that tiny pinch of finality. Upgrades were another one. Hotels offering a bigger room. Flights nudging me toward a better seat. Shipping speeds promising to make things easier. Declining felt like friction. Like I was being difficult for no real reason. So I said yes. $20 here, $30 there. I didn't need the space. I didn't care about the seat. I definitely could have waited an extra day. But the way it was framed made no feel awkward, like I was rejecting a kindness. Over time, those yeses stacked quietly. And when I looked back, I realized I rarely asked myself what I actually wanted. I just accepted what was offered because it kept everything smooth. Work had its own version of this. Coffee runs, lunch orders, group things that needed someone to just handle it. I was usually that someone. It was easier to pay and move on than to collect money later or send reminders. I told myself it was professional, that it made me reliable, and maybe it did. But a few lunches a month turns into a few $100s a year pretty fast. No one ever asked me to do that. That's the part that sticks. I volunteered quietly. I never felt angry about it. I just slowly absorbed the cost so things would keep moving. Delivery apps made it even easier to stop noticing. Not the food, the fees, service fees, small order fees, priority delivery, taxes layered until the total barely resembled the menu price. I'd feel a flicker of annoyance, then hit confirm anyway. Backing out felt like more effort than it was worth. When I finally looked at a year of orders, the fees alone were enough to make me pause. Not because they were outrageous, because I'd paid them so passively. I wasn't hungry for the food anymore. I was hungry for the transaction to be done. Credit cards fit right into that pattern. Carrying balances longer than I needed to. Making minimum payments because they felt cooperative, non-confrontational. Paying more felt like admitting something uncomfortable, that I'd spent money I didn't really have room for. So I stretched it out. Interest built quietly, predictably. When I finally did the math, it wasn't devastating. It was just slow, like realizing how long you've been leaking money without ever hearing a splash. Shared expenses and relationships complicated things further. Times when things weren't really even, but I didn't want to bring it up. Rent differences, utilities, groceries, small purchases that accumulated over months. I told myself it wasn't about the money, that being easy to live with mattered more. And maybe it did, but money became the substitute for conversations I didn't know how to have. Love didn't make it free, it just made it quieter. Family had its own version of this, covering things without discussion, helping out, paying for parts of trips, handling emergencies. Without really checking what it did to my own budget, it never felt like pressure. It felt like responsibility. But when I add up a few years of that pattern in my head, the number lands heavier than I expect. Not because I regret helping, because money quietly replaced conversations again. Even tipping wasn't always what I thought it was. I tip well, sometimes extra well. Not always out of generosity, if I'm honest. Sometimes out of nervousness. A fear of being judged, of being seen as cheap. A few extra dollars doesn't feel like much in the moment, but multiplied over years, it becomes another quiet cost of wanting to be perceived a certain way. This is the part I didn't want to look at first. Being low maintenance became part of how I saw myself. I liked that identity. It felt mature, like I wasn't high-strung or dramatic. But identities have budgets. And this one was expensive in ways I never really tracked. I noticed how often I paid for things to go away. Late fees because I didn't deal with something on time. Rush charges because I waited too long. Replacement items because returning something felt annoying. When I finally added those up over a year, it wasn't a crisis. It was just another reminder that avoidance has a price tag. I used to say, it's not worth the hassle, a lot. And maybe sometimes that was true. But over time, that sentence became a spending philosophy. A way to end decisions without really deciding anything. Phone plans, cable packages, add-ons I didn't need anymore. I didn't downgrade because calling customer service felt like a chore. So I paid more than I needed to, month after month, just to keep things unchanged. Temporary became permanent without me noticing. Refunds were another one. Times when I could have gotten money back but didn't bother. It felt impolite, or like too much effort for a small amount. Over a decade, those small amounts added up more than I like to admit. Not enough to be dramatic, enough to be tiring. Social plans were probably the hardest. trips, events. Tickets I couldn't really afford, but joined anyway because I didn't want to be the difficult one. I told myself I'd recover later, that future me would handle it. Future me is still handling it. None of this ever felt reckless. That's what makes it hard to see. It all felt reasonable, adult. That's what made it dangerous. When I do a rough, uncomfortable estimate of what all these moments cost over a lifetime, I don't even want to say the number out loud. It's not shocking. It's heavy. And it doesn't announce itself. Lately, I notice a pause. Standing in line, card in hand, that old instinct to keep things smooth still there. And for half a second, I hesitate. Not to fix anything, just to notice it. And that pause stays with me longer than the transaction ever does.